Determine the appropriate null and alternative hypotheses for each of the claims below. All right, so we have 3 claims, and we're going to go through the exercise of identifying what the claim is, and then identifying from the claim the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. Those are the pair of competing hypotheses that we will actually run our test on, right? So let's first look at the first statement. It says the department chair in English claims that the average price for books used by faculty in her department is less than $150. Okay, so I'm going to say the original claim is that the average price, which I'll represent as the mean, mu, is less than, so that's a less than symbol, and then $150. So you can put 150 with a dollar sign if you'd like. Okay, or you can just write 150 if you want. The context is clear that it's $150, you don't have to put the dollar sign. Okay, but that's your claim. Now, from your claim, you want to derive the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. And the way you do this is pretty simple. You have to ask yourself a simple question, which is, what symbol is being used in the claim? So if you look at that symbol, remember that less than, greater than, and not equal to, those 3 symbols belong to your alternative hypothesis. So if your claim has any of those 3 symbols, then it would make your claim the alternative hypothesis, meaning that the claim is the same as the alternative hypothesis. Okay, so it looks like that's the case here. So I'm going to go ahead and write down the claim in the position where the alternative hypothesis is, right? And so that's my HA. Or H sub A. So my H sub O, or my null hypothesis, that value is just going to be derived by looking at the alternative here and just expressing the complementary idea. In other words, if a number isn't less than 150, it must be what? It has to be greater than or equal to 150, right? Those are the only other cases, right? So you have to cover all the other cases, and that's how you get the other hypothesis. So what's the technique? We look at the claim, and we say, hey, what symbol is being used in the claim? Once we identify where that symbol belongs to, does it belong to HA or HO, or H sub 0, then we'll end up putting that claim into one of those 2 slots based on that discovery, right? So in this case, we said, hey, the claim here had the same symbol as HA, so it became HA only because of its symbol, right? If it had a symbol with an equal sign in it, it would have become the null hypothesis. But either way, so it becomes the alternative hypothesis, and then we get the other one just by using the idea of a complement, saying, if you're not less than 150 in this case, you must be what? Greater than or equal to it. Okay, let's look at the second one. It says a student government president claims that the average price for books used by faculty in the English department is at least $175. So what does that mean? Well, if I said you needed at least a C to pass this course, it would mean you needed a C or better, or a C or higher. So that means we're saying that, or they're saying that the mean, the average, right? So the mean is at least 175 means greater than or equal to 175, right? Because at least is the same thing as saying greater than or equal to. So again, now we look at the claim and we say, hey, where's this symbol? What type of symbol is it? Well, remember that if it's greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, or equal to, that belongs to the null hypothesis. So in this case, the claim is the null hypothesis. So we'll say, okay, H sub 0 versus H sub A. And the null hypothesis then is that the mean is greater than or equal to 175. And then the alternative hypothesis, of course, has to express the opposite idea, right? So again, just based on the symbol, we decided whether the claim was the null or the alternative. And then once we figure that out, then we just look at the other one and say, what's the opposite of being greater than or equal to 175? What's left over? It's just going to be less than, right? So again, a number is either greater than or equal to 175, or it must be less than 175. All right, then the last case, the manager of the bookstore claims that the average price of the books used by the English department is $160. So again, it's a claim about the average price. So we'll use the mean again for the symbol. So we'll say the mean. And this says that it is $160. In other words, it's equal to $160, right? $160. Okay, so if that's your claim, then you go through the same routine. You just say, hey, null hypothesis, alternative hypothesis. And you simply look at that claim and you say, oh, it's using one of those symbols, right? What are the symbols that we identify with the null hypothesis? So we're going to say the claim here again is the null hypothesis. And that means the alternative must express the opposite idea, or not equal to 160, right? Because if you're not equal to 160, you are not equal to 160. So that's it. So all numbers are either 160 or something other than 160, so the alternative must be not equal to 160. And there are 3 cases. Now, In the real world of hypothesis testing, probably the most common claim is an alternative hypothesis. And the reason for that is that typically, remember, the null hypothesis is the status quo hypothesis. So typically, it's already assumed to be true. And then because of that, we're usually testing a research hypothesis against that null hypothesis. So usually it's the research hypothesis or the alternative hypothesis that ends up being the claim in most of the cases. However, we want to be prepared for it to be sometimes the null and sometimes the alternative. You should be able to handle it in either case.